Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last session of the Near Web lecture series, a collaborative effort organized by blockchain clubs all over the world with the help of the Blockchain Acceleration Foundation. This session will be about play-to-earn gaming and the Metaverse, and it's hosted by the Imperial blockchain group, which me and Sean co-founded. We also have a guest speaker from the Human Guild, a gaming guild that is currently working with 50 or so games in the Near ecosystem. And he'll talk a bit about what he does as well with the gaming guild. Right, Sean, could you go back? Because for some reason it's not working for me.
Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, yeah, so just lay out the structure of the presentation. We'll start off with the evolution of gaming and then move on to what is play to earn, and then talk about the metaverse. And then we'll compare play to earn versus traditional gaming models. And then we'll talk about the risk and cons of play to earn, and then we'll move on to gaming guilds in general. Then we'll focus specifically on what makes Near good for gaming, and then delving into the Near gaming ecosystem, which should lead on to the Human Guild, and we'll talk about what they do as well. So before we get into play to earn, I think it's important to understand the evolution of gaming so to get a better grasp of how we got here. Games have been around since a long time, and in a lot of ways was part of human evolution surviving. But the earliest game board for the purpose of leisure known to have existed is from the Egyptian era, and it was around 3000 BC. And for a long time, similar games were developed, such as chess and Go, and they've obviously stood the test of time to the point where they still feel very common today. Beyond board games, it was only recently that we moved from physical board games to digital, subsequent to the invention of the semiconductor. It was shortly after the semiconductor invention that the first non-physical game was created, known as Spaceball, and it was developed at MIT in 1962. Shortly after, Pong by Atari became the first commercially available video game in 1973. It was placed in entertainment venues and arcades. It was a 2D game and required two to four players with a simple concept. You had a ball and a pad, or two pads on your end, and your objective was to prevent the ball going off screen. With your pad. It was very simple and had very primitive graphics. As technology advanced, gaming hardware became smaller and lighter. The 90s saw a series of gaming consoles released with a very small selection of games to play with, and again, very primitive graphics. This includes the PlayStation 1 in 1994. As time went on, computers gained mass adoption and people began playing pre-installed games such as Minesweeper and Solitaire with the release of Windows in 1995. And then the next decade after that, you saw consoles coming out like Nintendo and Nintendo Wii in 2006, where they translated physical motion into the movement of the avatar on your screen. You saw PlayStation, Xbox also emerge as like the oligopolies in the market. But then a real boom in the internet saw games available to play on like dedicated gaming websites such as Mineclip, where kids found themselves playing 8-ball pool for hours on end. And then in 2007, Steve Jobs announced the iPhone, a touchscreen mobile device with its own operating software. This led to a boom in mobile gaming, with developers able to code games. People could play on their phones, severely reducing the barrier to entry in game development with the launch of the App Store in 2008. The surge of cloud technology further allowed data on players' games to be stored on the cloud instead of on a piece of hardware. This increased the amount of games a player could play and allowed for online gaming. You could now play with your friends as long as you joined a common server or sent them an invitation. This led to different levels of socialization in gaming, with the ability to build communities, clans, and groups to further enhance the gaming experience. The 2010s saw the emergence of virtual reality, with companies such as HTC, Sony, and Oculus making strides in the space, with Sony announcing their headset, which would be able to be used with the PlayStation for VR-specific games. Along with this wave, development in augmented reality gaming began. Over time, it is clear the world is moving more and more digital, and the immersiveness of the gaming experience seems to be important to gamers. So one would have to ask, what's next? We'll park that thought for a bit, and I just thought I'd show a chart to demonstrate how the gaming market is currently. And you can see in 2020, the gaming market brought in $158.89 155.89 million in US dollars. So that should be billion, but yeah, 155.89 billion, and it's forecasted to go to 268 billion by 2025. And you can see on the right there's a table that kind of breaks down where that revenue comes from. And over the years, the revenue share from mobile gaming has increased. So yeah, sure, next slide. Yeah, so now we've talked about the evolution of gaming and the current gaming market. I thought we'd talk about what actually is play to earn. Play to earn is an idea for a new chapter of gaming, where there are real financial incentives. Gamers are rewarded for their participation with an in-game currency which holds real world value, as opposed to some imaginary elixir which does not translate to dollars and can only be used in-game. The play to earn gaming model also allows users to own assets in-game through NFTs and level up in a bid to increase or improve their assets. This model introduces a new element of game theory into the realm of gaming and can have many implications. The idea of making money from gaming is not novel in the sense that gamers currently make money from streaming their gameplay and through partnerships and sponsors with companies. However, for the first time, generating an income from purely the act of playing is being proposed here. In some developing countries, such as Indonesia, people have been able to successfully generate a second income, most notably with a game called Axie Infinity, which was the first mover in the space. On the next slide, I've pulled some interesting charts which illustrate the current landscape of play to earn. So this one shows the weekly active users of the top Ethereum games, which is a competitor to near. And you can see in around like November, there was a massive surge in like the amount of users in like the different projects such as Decentraland and Sandbox and Axie Infinity and Illuvium. The next slide should show a chart of like the amount of landholders. So on Decentraland and Sandbox, you can basically buy virtual real estate. And this is a chart basically depicting the adoption of, you know, buying virtual real estate on these two platforms. And yeah, just another chart to show the floor prices of the virtual lands on these two platforms. And I pulled all these charts from June Analytics. For anyone who doesn't know, that's a place where you can make queries and dashboards of blockchain data. And personally, I'm a big fan of their platform, and I cannot shill it enough for people who want to create queries and dashboards for like relevant information on like blockchain related information. So yeah, I mentioned Axie Infinity, the first play to earn game to become mainstream. So I thought I'd play a video of the gameplay trailer so you get a better idea of what the game actually entails. So Sean, if you can play that, if you can. Yeah, you can probably see like the graphics and the storyline is very primitive. It's a bit like a washed down version of Pokemon, like with all due respect to Axie. Yeah, so you could probably see like play to earn games have a long way to go in adoption, and that requires improving storylines and concepts, as well as building economic models which are sustainable in the medium to long term, which we'll touch on a bit later on. So I think I'll move on to like what is a metaverse. Although the definition of the metaverse is contested among different groups, it is generally agreed upon to be a shared immersive virtual world where users can enter in the form of cartoon avatars with their VR headsets, typically for an immersive experience. The overall goal seems to be to blur the line between virtual reality and the physical world. Since the rise of cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, the implementation of a metaverse has started to come into fruition. Since to create an open source world which no single entity has control over, decentralization is required in storing metadata, and the rise of NFTs has also allowed for an increase in customizability to allow for a better emulation of the real world. And you guys probably have like heard about like a lot of corporations being involved in, you know, they jumped on the metaverse bandwagon, and Facebook even rebranded to Meta to signal their intention in delving into being at the forefront of this metaverse wave. But what implications does the metaverse have for the gaming landscape? The metaverse allows for games to be interoperable with each other. So like a gaming project can buy land on somewhere like Roblox or Decentraland, and they become part of this world where users can go to play their game amongst other things. It's a bit like going into an arcade in your city. It also could enhance the gaming experience. through like a combination of VR and the hyper customizability of your clothes, your furniture, the possibilities are endless. And then also there's the financial incentives. So Sean, can you go next slide, please? Yeah, so I think I'll touch on a bit about how play to earn is different to traditional games and probably similar in some ways as well. Like to summarize the differences, I'd say play to earn has financial incentives, like I mentioned before, like the game theory involved. Like in the past, traditional games, like and in the present as well, their revenue was from like one-off purchases. Current games are from like in-app purchases, advertising, subscription, licensing, and yeah, stuff like that. Play to earn introduces more streams such as NFTs, whether that's collecting fees from trading of in-game assets or renting out land for like in-game digital events. Play to earn also prevents what you call gold farming. So that's the practice of acquiring in-game currency, such as like FIFA points on FIFA, or like coins on World of Warcraft, and then selling them illegally in secondary markets. And this leads to a lot of fraud and scams in that space. Another difference is the interoperability of gaming assets. You can't move like a gun you have on Call of Duty to a gun in Valorant, for example. Whereas like the play to earn model makes that possible. And that's because of NFTs. Another difference is the metadata stored on decentralized servers. Whereas like in traditional games, you have all the metadata of your assets stored on a centralized server. So if that server shut down, then you might not have access to your gaming assets, basically, which do not even have real world value anyways. And yes, the decentralized nature of gaming projects could mean it is more community driven, with governance, token holders voting on new game modes and decisions. And yeah, there's also like a shift towards in-game events which favor the metaverse a lot, which makes sure that there's no barrier for any influencer or celebrity to meet their fans, and they could just announce that, hey, my avatar is going to be at this certain location at a certain time. Like for example, Travis Scott did a Fortnite concert which drew nearly 28 million unique players to the event, with the performance he uploaded on YouTube exceeding 150 million views. And then Roblox also hosted a Lil Nas X concert recently as well. So yeah, I think that's me, and I'll just pass over the rest to you, Sean, who would start off with the risk and cons of play to earn games.
Cool. Okay. Right. So yeah, the rest of the play to earn. Oh, so we're gonna talk about risk and cons of play to earn games. So as Emran has discussed before, currently a lot of P2E play to earn games have these token incentives, which at times, that's really good for the users. You both make money from playing, but at the same time, sometimes it's not so sustainable. So say, for example, the Axie Infinity model before the SLP, if you guys are aware of that, that was basically a token where you could earn through playing the game. And it doesn't have much utility. So there's not many places where you could actually consume it. And that made it really just like a token where people can speculate the price on. And as the game became really popular, there were so many people who comes into this game in order to make money. And then in turn, that produced a lot of SLP. Now, when the market is good, these don't really create a problem. But when the market is bad, that really created a huge problem for the price of SLP, and has since like basically just plunged. And Axie Infinity has then took actions to kind of address the problem, but still it's a bit hard to save the falling token price. And ultimately, there is a sunk cost for entertainment purposes. And people might argue, well, people spend money on games anyways and never get anything back. So it's just a sunk cost for the purpose of their entertainment. But one could also argue that psychologically, this time it's different since now they know they own this asset and are aware of the prospects of profiting from it at some point. So then it becomes more like, okay, am I earning money? Like now, if you play a game and you realize I'm not actually earning money from it, it might make you think maybe I should, try out a similar game which has a similar mechanism, and then I could earn game from it. And that's if you don't really have a high user retention rate by saying I've got a good community or some things that the users just can't dispose of, then that's likely going to be the case. Now, in traditional Web2 gaming, when you invest money into a game, the more you invest, the less likely you are like to leave the game because you invested so much into this game. But in Web3, it's different. Once you want to leave the game, you could leave the game by selling all your assets. So the liquidity is there, and so games really do need to think about how they can increase their user retention rate. Another problem is there's a high entry barrier for larger games. So in Axie Infinity, you need 3 Axies, and by the time of when we were writing this PowerPoint, it needed $500 for 3. Now, to many people, it might not sound like a lot of money, but for a lot of the people who lives in less developed areas, $500 could be quite a lot for them. And that's not really good for the user growth of the game long term. And the next one we're going to talk about is gaming guilds. So we just spoke about the high entry barriers of these games. Now, what could be one solution? If there is a entity who basically owns a lot of these Axies or a lot of these equipments, and they could just basically give people these equipments for them to play the game, then that could potentially solve the problem. And that's how gaming guilds came around. So they are here to address the high barriers to entry by loaning out the in-game assets for gamers to use. And they also get involved in raising capital for gaming and NFT projects to boost the ecosystem. So in this way, they create somehow a positive feedback loop of these capital they use to basically earn from all these in-game activities to further develop gaming and NFT projects. And also, I just saw a question. Sorry, I'll take that one later on after I finish this slide. They are usually DAOs with their own governance tokens. So say, for example, Avocado DAO, YGG, Mirror Circle, these are some of the examples. And some of these DAOs, they train people in low-income countries to play to earn games to generate income. And these first emerged in Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Philippines, and just in general, that sort of area. And now it's also expanding to other areas such as Africa. Recently, there's a company called Jumbo, which they're like a Web 2.5 company. They are targeting the African region by connecting with the universities there to allow the students to use their spare time to play games like Axie Infinity to earn extra money. And they also form strategic partnerships with specific gaming projects so they can give members discounts in the in-game assets. And these kind of serve as the moat for these DAOs. And going back to the question of Osama, so is this model used because the incentive in cryptocurrency, because the incentive is in cryptocurrency or NFT? I'm not 100% sure whether I got your question, but just like going back to the incentive question, like usually you give incentive for users to keep them playing the game. That's one way to kind of keep up your retention rate. But if you do it in not so much of a sustainable way, then you create too much resources, which you just give people, and it becomes a farm and dump problem. And that's the same for whether you're just giving out tokens or whether you're giving out NFTs. It's the same thing. And so one example which I've mentioned was the YGG guild. And this guild, as you could see, it's got a structure where it's split it into 5 big categories where it owns some of the NFT gaming assets, make investments in games. It provides scholarship, which basically says you can come and join our guild and play games at no price. And then every dollar that you earn in, say, Axie Infinity or whatever, we earn a share of that. And then they also have sub-DAOs that's kind of concentrated in different regions. And also they've got third-party DAOs, which again serves the same kind of purpose as the main DAO, where they have NFT gaming assets, game seed investments, and scholarship programs. For Merit Circle, it's slightly different, where they have an ecosystem DAO, and that kind of splits into different game DAOs. Into like some of these DAOs can start to also begin their own like esports brand and merchandise to increase the revenue. And one DAO has begun to develop their own game in Merit Circle to increase the income streams, with plans to develop more with the following revenue stream to maximize the verticals. So this is like a diagram that illustrates what I was just talking about. In summary, the gaming guilds are kind of crucial to the developments of the gaming and play to earn ecosystem. But at the same time, there are sort of arguments where you could make that if these DAOs use their assets, or let's say what they own in an unsustainable way, they could just create bottom line Ponzi schemes for people, where you just attract people by saying, oh, I provide really good returns, but then you can't really sustain that forever, especially that right now the macro market is not in the best condition. Money is flowing out of crypto. And in this sense, like a lot of these games started crashing, and now the games are starting to look for more sustainable ways to create tokenomics model, which makes the game more attractive in the long term. But that's kind of out of the scope for this lecture. We're going to talk about what makes Near protocol really good for gaming. And that has to go back to how Near as a blockchain was kind of structured underlying in terms of its underlying mechanism. So it's a network on which a game can run on needs of to be inexpensive, fast, and scalable. And this is done through Near's unique sharding mechanism called Night Shard. And sharding is a method of distributing a blockchain's data into different blocks so that the nodes only need to handle a fraction of a network's transaction volume. And there are a few keywords here. So one of it is node. So every blockchain has nodes that basically validate the transaction, because the blockchain is just a series of blocks, and each block is containing some amount of transactions. And the node basically checks these blocks and say whether the transaction is valid. If it's valid, then the blockchain keeps on running. If it's not valid, then it gets rejected, so on and so forth. In the traditional sense, say for example, Ethereum, when it was first designed, every single node has to download the entire blockchain's history when you want to set up a node. So what that means is right now, Ethereum is around like 500 gigabyte, if I remember correctly. So if you want to set up a node in Ethereum right now, you need to download 500 gigabyte of data before you can say my node is now online, and you could start to mine for Ethereum. And for Bitcoin, that's roughly 300 gigabyte. And that's really, really not efficient, because for newer nodes to join, this creates quite a high barrier to entry. And at the same time, if your node is somehow offline, which means that you turn off your computer, your internet's off, so on and so forth, you have to kind of sync up with the internet again, sync up with what's the status of the blockchain. And that also takes quite a long time. So sharding basically says, okay, you don't have to remember everything in this blockchain. You could just remember part of it. And now that really reduces the burden on the nodes. And now people could basically, it reduces the barrier for people to become a node, in a sense that makes it more scalable, make it more decentralized. And at the same time, it also makes it quite secure. Near is also EVM compatible through the Aurora ecosystem. And at this moment, it's mainly coded in Rust, but in the future, if Aurora does expand more in the ecosystem, we could expect to see more people to code in Solidity. And it's currently also WASM compatible, making it really easy for developers to build on the network, and it's known for this really good UX. If you look at the UX design for Near comparing to a lot of the blockchains right now, you find it much easier to use, let's just say that. In terms of sharding, so we just spoke about sharding briefly. Traditional sharding treats each shard like another blockchain with shards running in parallel with each other. However, Near's Night Shard ecosystem is a bit different. It's modeled as a single blockchain with each block containing all transactions from all other shards. And participants don't need to download the full state of the block. And what that means is just what I mentioned, like you don't need to download the whole full history of the entire blockchain. They only need to maintain the state that corresponds to the shard that they validate the transactions for. And again, like I said, that really reduces the burden on kind of running the nodes, and also reduces the barrier for people to entry as running the node. If you want a more comprehensive kind of explanation, feel free to check out other sessions on this 10 series lectures and also on the Near official website. I personally, I've started to recently look into how to develop on Near. I would say the documentation is super useful, and although Rust as a language seems to be super scary at first, it's actually not as scary with Near because they provide so many good documentations there. And at the same time, if you're like a Solidity developer, you could expect in maybe 1 or 2 years time in the near future, you could just code in Solidity and change a bit of it and then ship it over to Near. Now, the Near gaming ecosystem is still very much in its nascency. You could only play relatively limited amount of it. But there's tons of projects who are trying to build it in the ecosystem. So here's just a chart of what's building on the ecosystem. And we're going to mention a few of them in the next few slides to give you a few examples, but feel free to check out everything in the ecosystem. So one of it is Crystal Naramunz. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but it's a multiplayer action RPG. It's set in a post-apocalyptic fantasy world, basically means after disasters, and it's got plenty of sci-fi elements in it. Unlike a lot of games, this one allows players to purchase in-game gold with fiat. So what that means is you could just basically on-ramp super easily, change your real-life money into crypto, or whatever gaming assets you want to buy. However, these assets can't be traded for between the players or turned into NFTs, so that it's in its own closed ecosystem, which doesn't affect NARS, the in-game token. And what that really means is, so I've mentioned before the unsustainable nature of many games right now, and that's because you could basically farm the assets, you could dump it, and then you could leave the ecosystem. And in this way, Crystal Naramunz is really trying to address this problem by forming a semi-closed ecosystem here. And it has its own unique take on of play to earn. You cannot loot the cryptocurrency in game and sell via exchange for fiat. The reason for this is to prevent money laundering and also to follow the legal regulations. What you loot is the gear that you can turn into NFTs and sell them on OpenSea, on open market, let's say. Gear is the mean measure of progression in the game and the natural way for players to monetize their time and efforts. And another game that's quite in development in Near right now is Hash. So it's a real-time sci-fi strategy game set in fictional Hermian galaxy. Players can own heroes, which are the most powerful units that can be used in the game. And it could be acquired through crafting, direct purchase, in-game summoning, and purchase or trade from other players. So in a sense, these kind of increases the consumptions of the assets in the game, and also that helps to create a more sustainable tokenomics in the game. And that really brings us to the end of this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot at me. Otherwise, we'll leave it to the Human Guild, which is a really important guild in the Near ecosystem, to present themselves. Cool. I would assume there's no questions. Then in that case, I think we could shift it over to the Human Guild.
So my name is Sasha. I pretty much was working in Near protocol since the beginning, since August of 2018. The kind of interesting backstory there, I joined a database company called MemSQL, used to be called MemSQL, now it's called Single Store, that was working on sharded databases out of San Francisco. Became good friends with employee number 1 there, who joined 5 years prior to me there. He subsequently left to pursue entrepreneurship, and I was keeping tabs on what he was doing. And then through this, and that was Alex Kidanov, one of the co-founders of Near. And then through a couple iterations, he explored artificial intelligence throughout 2017, but 2018, when artificial intelligence ideas did not work out, we pivoted into blockchain. So that's when I joined, actually, in August of 2018. Initial team was just 9 people. 7 was engineers. I was talking to the market, the only person talking to the market from the beginning. At the time, it was bear market, similar to what we see now. Not many people cared about the space. That was a big difference. And so initial assumption for us, and I'll explain how it's tied to the gaming, initial assumption for Near was that it's all about scalability, because when we started, the conversation was about scaling Ethereum, and there was a lot of challenges there in 2018. The team who built sharded databases was well positioned to build sharded blockchains. Then when I started talking to the game studios, actually, blockchain game studios, that was early 2019, gas prices were not that high. What was on top of mind of game studios was actually how to get gamers into games. So when I was telling them, like, hey, like, we're building scalable solution, they were telling me essentially like, well, we actually don't care. Like we don't need to, let's see. I can actually share the slides, I think. So I'll probably find it's okay, I have, I think, too many screens to, oh no, actually I found the right. Can you see the screen? Let's see, I'm gonna look through this. Oh, perfect, so you guys can see it. So when I started talking to the game studios and suggesting them that scalability is important, they were all saying that it doesn't resonate with them. Scalability is not important. Getting gamers into the game was much more important. Secondary problem would have been scalability if there are gamers to begin with. And so specifically, they were losing 199 out of 200 people on MetaMask. And so what Near did because of this feedback was actually completely rethink how UX is done on blockchain. We had opportunity to do this because we were like rebuilding blockchain at the time 3 times over, building from scratch. And so we completely changed how like onboarding is done, starting with browser wallet, as opposed to a Chrome extension. Fixed some of the UX issues there, some of the things you cannot change still, because if you're like for the first time buying crypto, you still have to go through KYC if you're doing it on centralized exchanges. So some of the UX cannot be fixed, but other pieces of onboarding can be fixed. And so that's what we focused because of the feedback from the game studios, actually. And then account model on Near is also very different. So there is no cryptography exposed to the users. My mom can use blockchain as a result. It's like very easy to use from the UX standpoint. And I think it actually makes it really good fit for gaming because of this, because of UX, also finality of the blockchain. So through that period, I talked to 500 or so founders. That was entirety of the space at the time. Given it was bear market, it was very little people joining the space. It was roughly 30 teams joining the space every month. 95% of those teams would go to Ethereum. So it was like very challenging to see how we're gonna get traction on Near even at the time. I started incubator accelerator for Near called Open Web Collective because we realized that business needs and our solution to business needs of founders actually help us win founders onto the blockchain. So they were picking technology not just because of technological solution, they were picking technology if they can help, they can get help also on the business side with like fundraising, go-to-market, legal, token economics, and so forth. And then so fast forward to today, we have pretty robust ecosystem. We started to do a lot of other modes of compute essentially on Near. We have Near native, we have Aurora, which is for Ethereum smart contracts. We also have Octopus, team out of China built, very experienced team from Substrate ecosystem built app chains on Near, using Near as a relay network for their chain, and so people can build like gaming chains, social media chains through Octopus as well. So if you want to build app chains, you can use Near through Octopus. If you want to build Ethereum-like experiences with MetaMask-like UX and reuse what you already have from Ethereum business, you go to Aurora. And then if you build natively on Near, you work with different Near teams. In our case, for Human Guild, we work mostly with gaming founders and virtual world builders who built natively on Near specifically. And we have some other new tools in ecosystem for privacy, like Calimera. We also have Mahina for storage. Pagoda is rebranded Near Inc. They're focusing a lot of dev tooling, building on top of the blockchain, such as like Indexer as a service, Node as a service. And so the applications today on Near, you can see full list on awesomenear.com. The ecosystem, I think, roughly resembles the use cases, design space of use cases that exist today in other blockchains. There are quite a bit of traction happening on the DeFi side from both Aurora and Near natively, lending protocols, alive, went live recently. There are 3 that like doing really well. 1 natively on Near, 2 on Aurora. We have multiple NFT marketplaces, Paras, Minbase, Endemic, and we have 120 or so weekly active DAOs as well. So Human Guild is one of the DAOs. We make funding decisions into games through our DAO, but we have like lots of DAOs in the ecosystem. And then ourselves, we focus a lot on gaming through this. So Human Guild actually started organizational decentralization at Near. We were the first spin-off from Near natively. Last year was the first one, but then a lot others followed. So Open Web Collective became spin-off, Calimero became spin-off, Proximity became spin-off, Aurora became spin-off. They're very different in terms of their scope. Some people productizing things, some people building communities, some of them non-profit, some of them for profits, but you can think of them as different startups in the Near ecosystem that are focusing on a particular area. In our case, we were focusing on founders building both in creator economy use cases and gaming from the beginning, but then middle of last year, we saw a lot of organic interest from artists to build games on Near. A lot of times they didn't have at the time game development skills, but they're trying to build something very simple on Paras, digital card games. And so we decided to double down. We did a lot of game jams where we found independent game developers from the Web2 space who are like interested in building games with us. Independent game developers bring creativity and inspiration to other founders of games. And so we doubled down as a result on gaming. And what we focus on is helping founders essentially become successful. We have a grant program for them. We don't advertise it much because we don't want to bring people who do things for the money itself. We instead kind of like mention it in one-to-one conversations with founders, but money ends up being kind of like actually the easiest part. The challenging part is how do you build fun gameplay? How do you connect it to open market economies? How do you make sustainable economies to begin with? How do you launch fast and have iterative mindset, more like web development mindset? And then how do you recruit people, engineering and otherwise? And then Web3 native go-to-market and fundraising. So those are like the main challenges for the founders, and we're kind of like focusing on them. In terms of projects, so you can look up on YouTube what games are built on Near blockchain, or just look for Human Guild. You'll see the video. It's a couple minutes video, 3 or 4 minutes, that shows 20 or so different games that already had available video. We kind of compiled it a month ago or so into like really cool video. You can see there are dungeon crawlers being built, there are platformers, strategy, RTS games, couple action shooters, and then RPG games. So there's like a lot of genres and platforms. So I'll quickly go through the challenges. As I mentioned, there are like multiple challenges related to building a game in a Web3 space. The first one is how do you build fun gameplay, right? Like as you know, games historically were primarily used as a form of entertainment. It's bigger market than movies and music combined, and people primarily up until play to earn played games because it's fun. And so we want to continue this. Obviously, we want to have very fun gameplays and very fun experiences as part of the game development cycle, as opposed to focusing just on incentive-driven games, so like grinding games. So that's a big core piece of the focus for us. Play to earn ends up being a nice added component integrated into the games if done right, and if you can build sustainable economy, but the focus is still on a fun gameplay. And the challenge is to actually combine those two. How do you combine open economies to the fun gameplay? So when it comes to economies, so blockchain essentially brings open economies to games, as we heard from the previous presentation. And this is a peer-to-peer market in nature. Players can trade to each other. It's like pure capitalist system, kind of like almost similar to how in offline world Magic the Gathering was working. So no restrictions on trading between people. And so you kind of need to consider interests of capital. So like Web3 investors, players, guilds, profit-seeking guilds that were mentioned in the previous presentation. Also, you need to consider the interest of players. Somebody is looking for the fun, somebody is looking for opportunity to earn without pay to win kind of mindset. Some people have more money than time. So how do you actually like balance those all of the players, interest of capital, and interest of players, given that players are also different, right? And so you need to think through the main levers for token and asset demand and supply. And so some games on Near have 1 token, some of them have 2 tokens, some of them just use Near token. And the successful ones are thinking from this like first principles, how supply and demand is driven based on user behavior. So for example, if you want to create a game in which there is a user generated content component, for example, you're building Mario Maker like game where you play Mario game, but you also can create levels. In this case, you want to increase amount of people doing this. You want to increase amount of user-generated content, and so maybe you'll create incentives within supply and demand for user behavior to create levels and play user-generated levels as opposed to official levels. And through this, you'll be able to get more user-generated content going within this particular game. And so you need to think through the minting and burning mechanics and iterate with early community, knowing that the economy that you'll come up with on a day one, it's not going to be perfect, but it's all about like testing it in the wild and actually working with early community. Another challenge is iterative mindset. So majority of the founders we're working with, they have more like blockchain engineering mindset, which is more around, well, I'm dealing with real money. It's very dangerous here, very different from Web2. Therefore, I need to be like very careful, very secure upon the launch. Iterative mindset is kind of like opposite of that. It's almost saying like, okay, well, when we launch, probably nobody will care. We'll be very early. Let's just kind of roll with V1 and then iterate through the feedback with early users. And I think those kinds of founders actually do better over time, who have more like web development mindset, you can call it. So example of this is Paras. It's a NFT marketplace out of Indonesia built on Near. And so they started with assembly script as their main a smart contract language in the beginning, even though people are telling them maybe it's not as secure as Rust. But they were able, and they actually launched without NFT standards on Near because those were not finalized at the time. They just like launched in a very like YOLO fashion, both using assembly script and not using NFT standards. But a year later, when they had a lot of volume, they actually rewrote the contracts in Rust. So they became in theory more secure, and they also adopted Near standard NFT standard, even though it was a lot of work at the time. They were able to benefit from launching early, getting feedback from the users, became the first marketplace on Near, and kind of like grew from there. So I think this mindset is like very important, and we're trying to find more founders of this mindset. And important piece here, why launching early is important, you can think of it as like similar to launching on App Store. There was a big difference in terms of launching on iOS in 2008 versus 2009 versus 2010, right? By 2010, it was like very competitive. 2011 was extremely competitive and so forth. But like the first couple of years, there was more greenfield opportunity. People can launch and get users easily because users were eager for applications or games. But at the same time, launching early means that you need to figure out all of the stuff, right? That we're talking right now, how to create fun gameplay, how open market economies connect to this gameplay, how to not destroy economy through the fact that it's open market economy. Another important piece is recruiting. So finding talent for the early stage startup, gaming and otherwise, is extremely challenging. I would say best to hire from your network if you can. That really helped Near actually early days. We're hiring mostly within our network. As you get like brand, as you get more scale, you can start using inbound. You can attract better talent because now people recognize you. In the beginning, it's better to start with network. Some of the creative, interesting ways to recruit people is to use Web3 native approach to this. So you launch in a very iterative way with a community. You don't have a game, let's say, in the beginning, but from the very beginning, you start sharing the concept, the art, the idea of what you want to achieve, and want to seek help from the beginning. So you can say like, hey guys, by the way, if you're excited about this, I'm actually looking for help. I need extra set of hands. And so what I've seen, people who've done it successfully, they were able to recruit both content creators, content marketers for their project. They were able to attract other engineers, Discord moderators, through just sheer this like Web3 approach to hiring, as opposed to being a corporate entity that hires people and pays them salary, and people join it because they want to get paid. Here you kind of like find people more organically, in a way, like people who really care about your project, even though it's early and feels like kind of like maybe too rough around the edges. If somebody's already excited about it and they have skill set and energy it's a good way to actually collaborate. So that's how you can like overcome some of the recurring challenges. And then go-to-market is different in Web3 as well. So it's very different from Web2 space. You build games in incremental fashion. You get community to engage in some decisions early on versus having like big launch in Web2 space. Twitter and Discord, I mean, channels, obviously. Twitter is more like top of the kind of how people discover your project, right? And Discord is where people go deeply and have more deeper conversations, participate in some decisions about the game, ideally over time. And so using those two in tandem is like really powerful, creating a behavior in which your community actually finds something to do every week on a recurrent basis, something participatory, something meaningful, something that's recurring is very important to kind of like to have people sticking through, even though like project maybe will have many months still up until the launch. So that's very important. And then Telegram is used for also more kind of like less deeper conversations. It's Web3 native, less so focused on the project itself, usually because there's no opportunity to add channels to it as opposed to how it's on Discord. And then fundraising is another big challenge. So Web3 Gaming went through this crazy hype cycle where when I was talking in 2019 to game studios, it was impossible to raise money at the time. Investors would want to see game launched before they want to invest. And that was challenging because unlike, let's say, DeFi, where you can launch contract over the weekend, to develop a game, it's a lot more complex. You need probably 2 years and a couple $1 million to work on a like really cross-functional team towards the launch. And so you need those money, but it was extremely challenging in the beginning, 2019. And I saw a lot of game studios going bankrupt as a result, unfortunately. Then we had this Axie spike. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to participate in blockchain gaming as investors and guilds. And then there was a lot of gaming-specific Web3 funds that were created in 2021. They invested in like hundreds of games similar to Axie Infinity afterwards. But then 6 months later, they realized that they're potentially sitting on a bunch of like garbage in terms of in terms of their investments, and so they're no longer active. So the gaming fundraising cycle went through this crazy multi-year hype cycle, but also you have the macro situation right now. We are going to the bear market. There was a lot of panic with Terra ecosystem. Obviously, a lot of investors are like really scared right now. So I'm actually suggesting projects to like wait at least for a month. It's very similar to, I think, March of 2020, how COVID was started. And in the beginning, there was a lot of panic. And then months later, it kind of subsided and people went back to doing business as normal. And then in terms of fundraising, people can go also do on-chain raises directly from on-chain. I think in the next 10 years, we'll see a lot of funding move to on-chain. Some of the regulations preventing it from happening faster. We have a couple on-chain fundraising platforms on Near, and there are like more solutions coming through. Like for example, Meta Yield is super interesting solution for ecosystem support, where people bypass their staking rewards in Near and give it instead to the project, and the project gives something back in return, either fungible tokens, non-fungible tokens. So we see kind of like emergence of new funding models as well, and we need more actually. We need more focus on public goods, for example, similar to what Gitcoin is doing in the Ethereum ecosystem and such. But that's kind of like fundraising, another big challenge. But our opportunity for building games today, as I mentioned, it's just like mobile in 2008 or social, building on top of Facebook, big returns to people who are early. I have a friend whose first startup had 100 million users. I was like insanely surprised when I heard this, and he's like, oh, that was like very simple. We were just like in the right time on Facebook. We were just like building the DNA kind of tree for people on top of Facebook in the same cohort as Zynga did, and so we just happened to have 100 million users. So that's kind of like interesting. It tells you like a bit more about the timing and importance of it. And so I think that's the big opportunity. Building games on Web3 today is a similar opportunity. I think it's early, but it pays off. In terms of learning and earning, obviously, ratio of capital to talent is still completely out of whack in Web3 space. I think there is still not a lot of talent who recognize the space for what it is. It's definitely a lot bigger than what it was in 2019. 2019, when it was 500 founders total in a space. Today we have 500 founders just on Near alone. So the space expanded dramatically, but also capital expanded even more so throughout this time. And I think being founder in a space is actually is a good thing, because ratio of capital to talent is still out of whack. It's easier to compete, obviously, in Web3 versus established places, mobile gaming or Steam. The successful strategy is already established there. It's very well understood. It's a good thing, but it's also very competitive as a result, right? And here, people are figuring out together all of this. As a result, actually, people are more collaborative. So what I'm focusing on a lot is getting founders to help other founders when it comes to like token economics. We had today a call about different contracts that one team can build and then other teams can reuse. Like vesting contract, for example, for games is important. Like we're essentially creating this mindset of founders helping founders. Similarly, how actually when Near was started, there was a lot of collaboration between layer ones and layer twos about different scalability solutions. So we started this YouTube whiteboard series. It's called, it's on YouTube. You can search whiteboard series. And there are like a lot of conversations with layer ones and layer two protocols. We borrowed at Near some ideas from Polkadot, for example, for one of the security pieces of building sharded systems, data availability. And then Ethereum 2 borrowed some ideas from Near over time. So it's like really collaborative. And so similarly here, when we work with gaming founders, we're trying to encourage the same kind of behavior. It's like, okay, like there's a lot to figure out here. It's better to figure out together as a community, as opposed to each one have to figure out all of these pieces that I just discussed. Yeah, and so another piece that presents opportunity for building on Web3, it's very international. It's not tied to Silicon Valley. Capital is coming from all kinds of places. Talent is coming from all kinds of places in the world. And so you can access talent globally if you know how to build asynchronous businesses, can figure it out on a go. All power to you. It's like very, very powerful. It's like Web3 is one piece of this big trend of economies getting decoupled from geography. And so I think founders who can take this opportunity actually stand to build really successful, like durable businesses. So that's kind of like what I wanted to share. For Human Guild, you can check out some resources. So we have actually open source smart contracts on on-chain wiki. I can share the links if needed. We're building out playbooks around go-to-market, accumulating library of legal documents and such. And there is also access to talent pool. Yeah, you can find us on Twitter. Also work with us through our DAO on Astra. And then you can search on YouTube for Human Guild, as I mentioned earlier, to see some sample of the games. I also have a podcast called Next Creators. I talk there to some game founders, but also to other participants of creator economy. Cool. So hopefully it was useful.
All right. If there's no more question, we're on top of the hour. Thank you so much for today. I learned a ton, and see you all next series.